a deserted backroad, 2 corrupt deputies, and a black man they think they can bury in the dirt and forget forever. But they have no idea who they're dealing with. He's not just another outsider they just tried to silence, the one man sent to dismantle everything they built. What starts as an act of brutality explodes into a war for truth, justice, and the very soul of Sagebrush County. And the twists you're about to witness? They'll hit harder than you expect. Stay tuned, because this isn't just about survival, it's about tearing down fear itself. Let us know what time you're watching, and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Isaiah Monroe tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he drove deeper into Sagebrush County. The old Ford pickup rattled along the cracked desert road, kicking up trails of dust behind it. In the distance, jagged mountains cut across the horizon like a warning. This place didn't welcome strangers. It barely tolerated its own. He had been warned, of course. Everyone from the governor's liaison to the federal investigators had told him Sagebrush wasn't just another sleepy town in the New Mexico desert. It was a place where time had stopped somewhere around 1955, and power had long settled in the hands of a few men who didn't like change, especially when change looked like him. Isaiah adjusted the sheriff's badge pinned inside his jacket. It was simple, unadorned, but heavy in ways few people would understand. He wasn't just stepping into a new job, he was stepping into a war. Up ahead, 2 police cruisers were parked diagonally across the road, blocking his path. Their light bars were dark, but the message was clear: turn around or face what's coming. Isaiah slowed the truck and pulled to a stop about 20 feet away. For a moment, there was only silence, the low hum of his engine, the hot wind scraping across the desert scrub. Then, 2 deputies climbed out of the cruisers. One was big, built like an old refrigerator, with a permanent scowl and mirrored sunglasses that reflected nothing but contempt. The other was thinner, wiry, with a crooked smile that screamed trouble. Isaiah cut the engine and stepped out of his truck, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. His boots crunched against the gravel as he stood tall, dust swirling around his legs. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The bigger deputy sauntered forward, hand resting casually on his belt. His name tag read, "Granger. Lost, are we?" Granger asked, his voice a low drawl soaked in disdain. Isaiah met his gaze evenly. "No, sir. Just heading into town. Got some business at the sheriff's office." The wiry one, Rourke, let out a short, barking laugh. "Business, huh? You selling Bibles? Or just looking for trouble?" Isaiah didn't flinch. He pulled his jacket aside, just enough for the badge to catch the light. "Name's Monroe," he said calmly. "Sheriff Commander Monroe." For a moment, there was a flicker of confusion between the 2 deputies. Then Granger's mouth twisted into a sneer. "You? Sheriff?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "That's rich." Rourke circled around Isaiah's truck, peering through the windows like a buzzard looking for scraps. "Must be some kind of mistake," he said loudly enough for Isaiah to hear. "Ain't no way they sent a city boy to run Sagebrush." Granger stepped closer, invading Isaiah's space. "See?" he said, his voice low and almost conversational. "We got a way of doing things out here. Ways you wouldn't understand. Best you turn that little truck around and keep driving, Commander." Isaiah stared at him, unblinking. "I was hired to serve this county," he said quietly. "All of it." Rourke stopped by the truck bed, tapping on the side with his knuckles. "And what if the county don't want serving, Sheriff?" he asked, voice dripping sarcasm. Granger's smile turned sharp. "You think a shiny badge and a few fancy words are gonna change Sagebrush? You don't know this place, son, and it sure as hell doesn't want to know you." Isaiah could feel the tension coiling tighter, could hear it in the way the wind seemed to hush around them, as if even the desert was holding its breath. I'm not here to ask permission, Isaiah said finally. His voice was calm, but under it ran steel. I'm here to enforce the law, Rourke scoffed. Law's what we say it is, out here, Granger nodded slowly, as if making a decision. He leaned in, so close Isaiah could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. You're making a big mistake, Monroe, he said. And around here, mistakes don't last long. Isaiah didn't move, didn't blink, didn't back down. For a long, crackling second, it was just the three of them locked in a silent standoff, dust and heat and hatred thick in the air. Finally, Granger stepped back, spitting into the dirt between them. Get moving, he growled. Road's clear. Isaiah gave him a short nod. No more than necessary. He climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and rolled forward, forcing Granger and Rourke to step aside. As he passed, he caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror, the two deputies watching him go, their faces tight, with something that wasn't just anger. It was fear, too. The kind of fear that comes when a man realizes the world he built might be about to burn down around him. Isaiah drove on toward Sagebrush County. The sun beat down, unforgiving. In the distance, he could see the faint outline of the sheriff's office. A squat, ugly building crouched at the edge of town like a bad memory. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel again, feeling the badge press against his chest. He wasn't here to make friends. He wasn't here to win popularity contests. He was here for justice. And by the time he was done, Sagebrush County was going to remember exactly what that word meant. Isaiah didn't even make it 3 miles into Sagebrush before trouble found him again. The cracked road twisted through low hills and dry creek beds, cutting across an endless sea of sage and dust. Isaiah kept his eyes sharp, his hands steady on the wheel. He wasn't about to underestimate these men, not after the reception he'd gotten at the roadblock. The sun blazed overhead, a relentless hammer of heat, when he noticed a second set of headlights gaining on him fast. He checked his rearview mirror. A black and white patrol car. No sirens, no flashing lights, just riding his bumper closer than any professional should. Isaiah sighed under his breath. Here we go again. He pulled his truck over onto the dirt shoulder, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The patrol car screeched to a stop inches from his tailgate, dust clouding the air between them. 2 doors slammed. Heavy boots crunched toward him. Isaiah rolled down his window halfway, resting both hands on the wheel where they could see them. Deputy Granger appeared first, face flushed from the heat, and something more primal. Rourke trailed behind, that same crooked grin plastered across his face. License and registration, Granger barked, tapping the window with his knuckles hard enough to rattle the glass. Isaiah didn't argue. He reached slowly into the glove box, retrieved his paperwork, and passed it out the window. Granger snatched it from his hand, giving it a glance so quick it couldn't have told him anything useful. Then he crumpled the papers in his fist and tossed them onto the dashboard. You got any idea why we pulled you over? Granger asked, voice thick with mockery. Isaiah kept his tone even. I wasn't aware I did anything wrong, Deputy. Rourke laughed under his breath, stepping closer to peer into the truck's cab. You didn't signal back there at the turnoff, Granger said. Could have caused an accident. Gonna have to check the vehicle. Standard procedure. Isaiah knew it was a lie. There hadn't been a turnoff for miles. But he also knew better than to escalate the situation here, alone, in the middle of nowhere. Go ahead, Isaiah said, keeping his voice steady. Granger nodded to Rourke, who immediately yanked open the passenger door and started rummaging through Isaiah's things like a raccoon digging through garbage. Papers scattered across the seats. A backpack was unzipped, its contents dumped onto the floorboard. Isaiah sat still, jaw tight, as the deputies turned his truck inside out. Looky here, Rourke said suddenly, holding up a small Ziploc bag containing a white powdery substance. His smile widened into something truly ugly. Isaiah's stomach dropped. Well, what do we have here? Granger drawled. Looks like possession of a controlled substance. Sheriff, Isaiah didn't blink. That's not mine. And you know it. Granger leaned in close. So close Isaiah could see the sunburn peeling off the man's nose. Don't matter whose it is, he said softly. Matters what the report says, Rourke chuckled, tossing the bag onto the passenger seat like he was planting a flag. You people think you can just come in here and take over, he said. But out here, we make the rules. Isaiah didn't respond. His mind was racing, calculating every possible move. He knew if he argued, if he fought back, they'd use it as an excuse to escalate. And out here, with no witnesses, escalation meant one thing. Step out of the vehicle, Granger ordered, unclipping the strap on his sidearm for emphasis. Isaiah obeyed, moving slowly. He stepped down into the dust, standing tall, keeping his hands visible at all times. Granger grabbed his arm roughly, twisting it behind his back, slamming him against the side of his truck. Resisting? Granger sneered. Careful now, Sheriff. Wouldn't want to add assaulting an officer to the charges. Isaiah said nothing. He gritted his teeth as the metal of the truck's body, heated by the sun, seared against his cheek. Rourke moved around them, his boots scuffing against the gravel. Isaiah could feel the shift in the air, the way it grew thicker, heavier, like a storm about to break. They weren't just harassing him anymore. They were setting him up for something much worse. Granger patted him down roughly, making a show of searching for weapons. Before stepping back, "You're under arrest," he said. "Possession with intent to distribute." "You're making a mistake," Isaiah said quietly. Granger smiled. "A slow, cruel thing." "No, Sheriff," he said. "You made the mistake. Thinking you could come here. Thinking you could wear that badge." Rourke pulled a pair of zip ties from his belt, binding Isaiah's wrists tightly behind his back. The plastic bit into his skin. They weren't reading him his rights. They weren't following procedure. This wasn't an arrest. It was a warning, a message. And Isaiah knew exactly what kind of message men like this like to send. Granger shoved him toward the patrol car, not into it, around it, toward the open desert, beyond the shoulder. Isaiah stumbled but kept his footing, forcing himself not to show weakness. "Where are we going?" he asked. "You'll see," Rourke said with a grin. The two deputies marched him off the road, past the ditch, into a dry wash littered with tumbleweeds and sun-bleached rocks. No one around, no cameras, no backup coming. Isaiah's heartbeat pounded against his ribs, but he kept his breathing even. Granger stopped near a patch of soft sand and jerked Isaiah to a halt. "Start digging," he said, tossing a rusted old shovel onto the ground. Isaiah looked down at it, then back up at the deputies. "You serious?" he asked. "Dig," Granger repeated. "Or we dig for you." Isaiah hesitated only a moment before kneeling down awkwardly, the zip ties biting into his wrists, and starting to claw at the sand with the edge of the shovel. Above him, Rourke and Granger leaned against the patrol car. Laughing and trading jokes like this was just another day at the office. Isaiah worked methodically, moving sand as best he could with bound hands. Every scrape of the shovel brought the situation into sharper focus. They didn't plan to arrest him. They didn't plan to let him walk away. They were preparing his grave. Dust coated his tongue. Sweat burned his eyes. Still, he kept digging. He was biding his time, watching, waiting, because Isaiah Monroe hadn't survived 2 tours overseas, hadn't fought through hell and worse, just to be buried in the dirt by a couple of cowardly men, too scared of change to face it like real lawmen. He would not die in Sagebrush County. Not like this. Not without a fight. And not before he finished what he came here to do. The sun was a merciless hammer overhead as Isaiah kept digging, the rusty shovel slicing weakly into the dry desert sand. His wrists burned where the zip ties dug into his skin, each movement making them cut deeper. Dust choked the air, and sweat stung his eyes. But he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Above him, Granger and Rourke lounged against the patrol car, watching him with lazy cruelty. They weren't rushing this. No. They wanted him to feel every moment of it. They wanted him to know exactly how powerless he was out here. "You know," Rourke called out, kicking a rock lazily, "this hole's not just for you, Sheriff. It's for every outsider who thinks they can come in here and change things." Isaiah said nothing. He focused on digging, shoveling just enough sand to keep them from getting impatient. He was stalling for time, waiting for an opportunity, hoping for a miracle. But deep down, he knew there might not be one coming. Minutes stretched into an hour. His muscles ached. His shoulders screamed. And still they stood there, watching, smirking, enjoying the show. Finally, when the hole was about 3 feet deep, Granger pushed off from the car and sauntered over. "That's enough," he said, voice casual, like they were just out for a Sunday stroll. "Get in." Isaiah hesitated, staring at the shallow grave he had just dug for himself. The earth looked dark and greedy at the bottom, hungry to swallow him whole. Rourke stepped closer, hand resting on the grip of his pistol. "Move," he barked. Isaiah climbed into the hole, moving stiffly, with his hands still bound behind him. The sand shifted under his boots as he lowered himself into the grave. For a moment, he stood there, chest heaving, staring up at the two men who held his life in their hands. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice low but steady. Granger laughed. Not a big laugh, just a quiet, ugly one. "Yeah, we do," he said. And then the first shovelful of dirt hit him. It landed hard against his chest, heavier than he expected. Cold. Despite the heat in the air, Isaiah flinched instinctively, but he didn't move otherwise. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Another shovelful came, then another. Sand and dust rained down on him, filling the hole around his legs, climbing higher inch by inch. Granger and Rourke worked with sick enthusiasm, tossing dirt with quick, practiced motions. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. The message was clear. You don't belong here. You never did. And you're not leaving alive. The sand pressed against Isaiah's knees, then his hips. It pinned his legs, made it harder to shift or brace himself. He tried to steady his breathing, slow and shallow, remembering his training. Panic would only make things worse. Focus. Survive. The dirt kept coming. His arms were pinned now, the sand rising up to his chest, compressing him tighter with every shovel load. He could barely move. His heartbeat hammered against his ribs, wild and frantic. Above him, Rourke leaned on his shovel, grinning down into the grave. "How's it feel, Sheriff?" he asked. "Still think you're in charge?" Isaiah didn't answer. He couldn't waste the air. Granger stepped closer, crouching down beside the grave. His mirrored sunglasses reflected Isaiah's face, smeared with sweat and dust, barely recognizable. "You thought you could change this place," Granger said, voice almost tender, "but you're just another fool who didn't understand the rules." He stood up and shoveled another load of dirt onto Isaiah's chest. The weight grew unbearable. It pressed against his lungs, his ribs, his shoulders. Every breath was a battle. Every second stretched out like an eternity. Isaiah's world narrowed to a thin strip of sky above him, a slice of pale blue framed by the jagged edges of the grave. His vision blurred at the edges. His body screamed at him to give up, to close his eyes and let the darkness take him. But somewhere deep inside, a fire burned. He remembered the faces of the people he had sworn to protect, the tired shopkeepers, the scared mothers, the kids who had never known anything but fear in this town. He remembered why he had come here, why he had taken this job, not for the badge, not for the title, for them. And he wasn't going to die in a shallow hole without a fight. Not today. He shifted, barely a twitch of his fingers under the sand, testing, calculating. Above him, The two deputies wiped their hands clean, satisfied. "Leave him," Granger said. "Buzzards'll find him soon enough." Rourke chuckled as he kicked a final clump of dirt into the hole. "Sweet dreams, Commander." They turned and walked back to their patrol car, their boots crunching on the gravel, their laughter echoing across the empty desert. Isaiah listened to the car doors slam shut, heard the engine roar to life, felt the vibration through the ground as they drove away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the hot stillness. And then, for the first time, he was truly alone. The desert fell silent. No birds, no wind, just the sound of his own ragged breathing. He tilted his head back as far as he could, straining to see the fading line of the horizon. He couldn't move his arms, couldn't move his legs. The dirt was packed too tightly now. Every breath was harder than the last. His chest barely had room to expand. Isaiah closed his eyes for a moment, forced himself to think this wasn't the first time he'd faced death. It wasn't even the worst. In Afghanistan, he had crawled out from under burning wreckage. He had survived enemy ambushes, roadside bombs, betrayals. He hadn't given up then, and he wasn't about to give up now. Slowly, painfully, he began to shift his shoulders, tiny movements. At first, wiggle, push, wiggle again. The sand gave a little. Not much, but enough. He worked methodically, inch by brutal inch, ignoring the screaming protest of his muscles. His hands, still bound behind him, scraped against the rough plastic of the zip ties. But he kept moving. Tiny movements, shallow breaths. Focus. Survive. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the wash. The temperature dropped just slightly, the oppressive heat easing enough to give him a sliver of strength. He didn't know how much time had passed. Minutes. Hours. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the next breath, the next shift, the next inch closer to freedom, and Isaiah Monroe wasn't done fighting yet. The desert had a way of swallowing sound. Out there, buried beneath the dirt and heat, Isaiah Monroe fought for every breath. The world shrank down to the grainy pressure against his ribs, the fire burning in his muscles, and the thin ribbon of sky above him that kept fading into gray. He didn't know how long he struggled. Time became meaningless. It could have been minutes, hours, it didn't matter. All he knew was that if he stopped, even for a second, it would be over. And then, somewhere in the distance, he heard it, a faint, irregular crunch of tires rolling slow over gravel, a low, growling engine, a sound so out of place in the dead stillness that it almost didn't seem real. Isaiah forced his eyes open wider, blinking against the sting of dust. He tried to call out, but the weight on his chest strangled the sound before it could leave his throat. The truck kept coming, closer, louder. Then it stopped. For a terrifying moment, there was only silence again. Isaiah stared up at the empty sky, willing whoever it was to come closer, to see, to hear. Then, a door creaked open. Footsteps crunched toward him. Slow, hesitant. A flashlight beam cut across the sand, searching. It danced over the patrol car tracks, the disturbed earth, and then it landed on him, just a sliver of a man's face, visible through a mess of dust and shadows. "Lord Almighty," the voice breathed out. It wasn't the voice of a young man, or a cop, or anyone looking to finish what Granger and Rourke had started. It was the voice of someone older, worn down by life but not completely broken. It was Hope. The light dropped as the figure rushed toward him. "Hold on, son. Hold on," the voice said. Closer now. Rough hands hit the dirt, scooping, clawing desperately. The first few handfuls of sand came easy. Then the rescuer cursed under his breath as he realized how packed the dirt had become around Isaiah's body. Isaiah felt the man's fingers working around his chest, trying to free his arms. Every movement sent jolts of pain through his joints. But Isaiah gritted his teeth and bore it. "Name's Hank," the man said between grunts, not even sure if Isaiah could hear him. "You hang in there, all right? Ain't nobody dying out here today if I can help it." The shovel appeared again, digging carefully now, faster as Hank realized just how bad it was. Sand flew in messy sprays, Hank working like a man possessed. Minutes dragged by. Hank worked without stopping, his breathing ragged with exertion. Finally, with a wet, sucking noise, Hank managed to free Isaiah's right shoulder, then his left. He grabbed both under the armpits and hauled with everything he had. Isaiah broke free of the grave with a gasping, shuddering cry, collapsing onto the packed desert floor. His whole body trembled, muscles cramping from the strain, lungs burning for air. Hank dropped to his knees beside him, panting. "Easy now, easy," Hank said, pulling a flask from his belt and tipping a trickle of water between Isaiah's cracked lips. "Small sips. Don't shock your system." Isaiah choked on the first swallow, but managed a second, and a third. The stars above swirled and twisted, the desert spinning around him. But he was alive. Alive. It took several minutes before Isaiah could form words. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hank Myers," the man answered. "Just a stubborn old fool who don't sleep much and drives these back roads to clear his head." Isaiah managed a weak, grateful nod. "Sheriff Monroe." Hank's face changed at that. He leaned back on his heels, eyes narrowing slightly. "I figured you were somebody important," Hank said. "Ain't the first time they tried to make someone disappear out here, but burying a sheriff? They've lost their damn minds." Isaiah coughed weakly, the pain flaring through his chest with each spasm. "They think they own this place," he said, voice ragged. Hank nodded grimly. "They have for a long time." The night pressed down heavy around them. The desert, silent witness to 1,000 buried crimes, seemed to lean in closer, listening. "We can't stay here," Hank said, scanning the darkness. "If they find you missing, they'll come looking. And if they catch us out here, it won't end any better the second time." Isaiah tried to move, but his legs gave out underneath him. Hank caught him with surprising strength for a man his age. "Don't you worry," Hank muttered. "I got you." With effort, Hank half-carried, half-dragged Isaiah to his battered old pickup truck parked just off the road. He gently loaded him into the passenger seat, buckled him in, and slammed the door shut. The truck groaned in protest as Hank climbed behind the wheel and fired the engine to life. He didn't waste time. He turned the truck around, bumping back onto the dirt road, and speeding away from the grave that had nearly claimed Isaiah's life. For the first few miles, they said nothing. The only sounds were the rumble of the engine, the rattle of loose tools in the truck bed, and Isaiah's shallow, painful breaths. Finally, Hank spoke again. "I know a place," he said. "Safe enough. For tonight, anyway." Isaiah didn't ask where. He didn't have the strength. He closed his eyes, letting the motion of the truck lull him into something close to sleep. But even with his body shutting down, his mind stayed sharp. Faces floated behind his eyelids, Granger sneering, Rourke laughing. The townspeople who had suffered in silence for too long. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Hank's farmhouse emerged from the darkness like a lighthouse, its porch light casting a pale glow against the night. He pulled up alongside a rusted mailbox, shifted the truck into park, and killed the engine. "Come on now," Hank said softly. "Let's get you inside." Isaiah tried to protest, tried to insist he could walk on his own, but Hank wasn't having it. He got Isaiah out of the truck and up the steps with a patience and strength Isaiah hadn't expected. The inside of the farmhouse smelled of coffee, old wood, and something comforting Isaiah couldn't quite name. Hank settled him onto a worn couch near a stone fireplace, grabbed a blanket from a nearby chair, and draped it over his shoulders. "You sit tight," Hank said. "I'll fetch you some real water, and then we'll figure out what the hell to do next." Isaiah nodded weakly, but inside, The fire was already starting to burn again. They thought they'd buried him. They thought they'd silenced him. But they had made one fatal mistake. They'd left him breathing. And Isaiah Monroe wasn't the kind of man to waste a second chance. Not when everything and everyone was still worth fighting for. Morning broke over Sagebrush County, like a bruised and battered thing. The sky blushed pale pink over the desert, but the land itself stayed stubborn and hard, as if even the sun couldn't soften it. Inside Hank Meyer's farmhouse, Isaiah Monroe stirred awake to the creaking sounds of a house that had seen better decades. Every part of him ached. His ribs screamed with every breath. His arms throbbed where the zip ties had cut into his skin, and his throat felt like sandpaper. But he was alive. That alone was enough to push him upright, fighting against the stiffness that wanted to keep him down. Across the room, Hank stood by an old wood-burning stove, frying something that smelled vaguely like bacon. The sizzle filled the kitchen, along with the sharp, earthy smell of strong black coffee. Isaiah swung his legs over the side of the couch, the blanket slipping from his shoulders. Hank turned at the movement, wiping his hands on a dish rag. "Easy there," Hank said. "You've been through hell. No sense rushing to get back to it," Isaiah grunted, a sound halfway between agreement and stubbornness. His whole body felt like it had been run over by a freight train, but he wasn't about to sit still, not when there was work to do. He accepted the cup of coffee Hank handed him, the mug chipped and warm between his fingers. The first sip burned all the way down, but Isaiah welcomed the pain. It meant he was still here. After a few minutes, Hank pulled up an old chair and sat across from him. For a while, they just drank coffee in silence, the kind that settles between two men who have seen more than they'll ever say out loud. Finally, Hank leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know," he said, voice low, "I figured you were trouble the minute I saw you buried out there." Isaiah smiled grimly. "Trouble tends to find me." Hank nodded like he understood more than Isaiah was saying. "They didn't just come after you 'cause you're an outsider," Hank said. "They came after you because they're scared." Isaiah met his gaze, silent encouragement. "You need to understand what you're up against," Hank continued. "Sagebrush ain't like other places. The men running it, they don't just bend the rules. They are the rules." Isaiah set his coffee cup down carefully. "Tell me," he said. Hank sighed, rubbing a hand over his weathered face. "It started small," Hank said, "decades back. A couple of deputies skimming off drug busts, shaking down local businesses. Folks talked about it, but nothing ever stuck. Evidence went missing. Witnesses changed their stories." Isaiah listened intently, filing every word away. "Then it got worse," Hank said. "Land seizures. Safety inspections that just happened to shut down any business that didn't pay their fees. They got their hooks into the judges, the city council, even the churches. Pretty soon, no one could breathe without permission. And nobody fought back?" Isaiah asked. Hank shook his head, a flash of shame crossing his face. "Some tried," he said. "Farmers who refused to sell, teachers who spoke out, cops who didn't play along. What happened to them? You ever wonder why there's so many missing person posters around here?" Hank asked quietly. Isaiah's jaw tightened. "And the people, most gave up," Hank said. "You work your whole life to build something. You don't want to see it burn down out of pride, so you keep your head down. You tell yourself it's not your fight." Isaiah looked out the grimy window, the desert stretching endless beyond the fields. He could feel the weight of the town pressing against the walls, thick with years of fear and silence. "You're saying they're still in power," Isaiah said. Hank gave a bitter laugh. "They are power," he said. "Granger, Rourke, the others like 'em, they're just the muscle. The real rot goes higher." Isaiah sat back against the couch, mind racing. He had known it wouldn't be easy coming here. He had known he would face resistance. But this was an entire system built to protect itself at any cost. "And you?" Isaiah asked, studying Hank carefully. "You stayed quiet all these years." Hank didn't flinch under the question. Yeah, he said. I stayed quiet. I kept my farm, my family. Figured surviving was enough. He paused, voice thickening. My brother. He wasn't so lucky. He tried to stand up once. Deputy back then, like you, tried to expose the extortion. They found him face down in the irrigation ditch, called it an accident. Everybody knew better. Nobody said a damn thing. Isaiah's stomach twisted. After that, Hank said, voice hollow, I learned you don't fight the storm. You batten down and pray it passes. Isaiah leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his own voice a low rumble. Storm's here now, he said, and it's not passing. Hank studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. You really gonna go after him? Hank asked. Even after what they did to you? Isaiah didn't hesitate. I didn't come here to survive, he said. I came here to clean house. Hank sat back, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. Well, hell, he said. Maybe you ain't the fool I thought you were. They sat in silence for a moment longer, the fire crackling softly between them. Then Hank stood, reaching into a battered old drawer in the kitchen. He pulled out a manila folder, thick and weathered at the edges, and dropped it onto the table. Found this years ago, Hank said. Kept it, just in case someone like you ever showed up. Isaiah opened the folder carefully. Inside were old police reports, complaints that had never been filed properly, photographs of injuries, bank receipts, pieces of a puzzle that painted a damning picture of Sagebrush's dark underbelly. It wasn't enough to convict anyone on its own, but it was a start. Isaiah closed the folder, feeling the weight of it in his hands. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Hank said, reaching for his hat. This ain't over. Not by a long shot. Isaiah stood, swaying a little, but finding his balance. No, he said. It's just getting started. Out beyond the window, the sun was climbing higher into the sky, burning away the last traces of the night, and somewhere out there, the men who thought they had buried him were about to find out just how wrong they had been. The heat of midday bore down on Sagebrush County like a hammer, but inside Hank's farmhouse, the air was heavy for a different reason. Isaiah sat at the old kitchen table, flipping through the evidence Hank had kept hidden all those years. Each page he turned was another brick in the wall of corruption that had ruled this town for far too long. Names he recognized, names he didn't. Dates that lined up a little too neatly with businesses lost. People disappeared, families ruined, and all of it quietly swept under the rug. Hank leaned over his shoulder, pointing to a blurry photograph of a man standing next to a county official, both smiling too widely. That's Raymond Cutter, Hank said, head of the town council. Looks respectable enough, don't he? Took kickbacks for years. Helped Granger and the others bury complaints faster than a desert storm. Isaiah studied the image, memorizing every line of the man's face. They built themselves a little kingdom, Hank said bitterly. Thought no one would ever come knocking. Isaiah closed the folder and sat back in the chair, feeling the weight of it pressing down on him. It wasn't just Granger and Rourke. It was the entire foundation of the town that was rotten. We need more, Isaiah said. This won't stick unless we back it up. Hank nodded. I got a list of folks who might talk, people who lost something, businesses, family, but most of them are scared. They've been scared a long time. Isaiah leaned forward, voice steady. Then we give them a reason not to be. That afternoon, Isaiah and Hank started knocking on doors. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't flash badges. Isaiah knew better than that. He came as he was bruised, dusty, the desert sun at his back, and he spoke the truth. Some doors slammed in their faces before a word could be spoken. Others cracked open just wide enough for frightened eyes to peek through. A few, a precious few, opened all the way. An elderly woman named Mrs. Ramirez let them into her kitchen, hands trembling as she poured them sweet tea. Her son had tried to start a hardware store downtown, refused to pay protection to the deputies. One morning, he found the store burned to the ground, and no one ever bothered to investigate. A young father named Tyler whispered his story, while glancing nervously over his shoulder. A traffic stop, a planted bag of meth, a plea deal he'd been too scared to fight. Piece by piece, Isaiah collected their stories, built a map of the rot that stretched through sagebrush like tangled roots. Every new story fueled the fire burning inside him. By sunset, they returned to Hank's farmhouse, both exhausted but carrying a folder thick with notes, names, and raw truth. Isaiah dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud and sat down hard in the nearest chair. "We're getting close," he said, voice rough with grit and determination. "One more push. Just need solid proof tying them to the river rats." Hank nodded, pulling a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet and setting it on the table between them. "You earned it," he said, pouring 2 fingers into each glass. Isaiah accepted it with a small nod. They drank in silence, the air between them filled with more than words could carry. But outside, in the thickening dark, danger was already moving. Neither of them noticed the faint shimmer of light down the road. Headlights cutting through the dusk. A truck engine humming low, predatory. It wasn't until the first window shattered that they realized what was happening. Glass exploded inward with a deafening crash. Shards raining across the room. Isaiah hit the floor instinctively, rolling toward the nearest cover. Hank cursed, diving after him. Another crash. Another window blown in. Then came the smell. Smoke. Thick and oily, creeping in through the broken windows like a living thing. "They said it!" Hank yelled, coughing. Isaiah was already moving. He grabbed the folder of evidence off the table, shoving it inside his jacket. "Back door," he barked. Together, they staggered through the smoke-choked house, shouldering past the old screen door and tumbling out into the yard. Behind them, flames leapt up in the windows, casting wild shadows against the desert floor. The fire roared like a living beast, feeding hungrily on Hank's memories, his home, his life. They stumbled away from the house, coughing, choking, until they reached the edge of the field where Hank's pickup sat hidden among the trees. Isaiah turned, chest heaving, to watch the farmhouse collapse inward. The roof sagged with a groan, the walls buckling under the heat. It was gone. Everything Hank had built, reduced to ash and smoke. For a moment, Hank just stood there, staring, the light from the fire painting deep lines across his face. Isaiah laid a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Hank shook his head once, hard. "Don't be," he said, voice rough. "Wasn't much worth saving anyway." They both knew it was a lie. Hank wiped his sleeve across his face, smearing ash across his skin. "They're scared," Hank said. "Burning my place? That's desperation." "They know you're coming," Isaiah nodded grimly. "And they just made it personal," Hank grunted. "Wasn't personal already," Isaiah gave a bitter smile. "It is now." They climbed into the truck and tore away from the fire, the orange glow fading behind them. The desert swallowed them up again, but now it felt different. Now it was war. They drove in silence for a long time, winding through dirt back roads Hank knew by heart. Finally, they pulled into an abandoned barn on the far edge of town, one of Hank's old hiding places from another life. Inside, Isaiah spread out the salvaged folder on the floor, sorting through the pages, ignoring the throbbing pain in his ribs. They had no home base now, no fallback. It was just them and the truth they carried. But sometimes, the truth was enough. Isaiah looked up at Hank, who stood watching him under the dim light filtering through the broken rafters. "They think burning your house was the end," Isaiah said, voice low but burning. "It's just the beginning." Hank cracked a thin, grim smile. "You ready to finish this?" he asked. Isaiah stared down at the evidence, at the names and faces that had haunted Sagebrush for decades. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." Outside, a dry wind howled across the desert, stirring the dust into swirling ghosts. The storm they had feared for so long wasn't coming. It was already here. The sun hung low over Sagebrush County, casting long, stretched shadows across the cracked streets. The heat was less brutal now, but it left behind a restless, jittery energy, like the land itself knew something was about to snap. Isaiah Monroe stood at the edge of the town square, looking out over the place he had once hoped to rebuild. Now, he was here to tear down the rotten parts that refused to die. Word had gotten around. The new sheriff was making a stand. People whispered about it in cafes, in back rooms, behind closed doors. Some were curious, some were terrified, but curiosity was enough. And fear had a way of drawing a crowd. They trickled in slowly at first. Old men leaning on canes, mothers holding their children's hands a little too tightly, tired workers, still in dust-covered clothes. They circled the square, keeping their distance, as if proximity alone might make them a target. Isaiah didn't blame them. He understood the weight of fear better than anyone. From the steps of the courthouse, Hank Myers set up a small portable speaker and microphone. Equipment scrounged from a local church, too scared to host him openly. It crackled weakly to life as Hank gave Isaiah a quick thumbs up. Isaiah adjusted the microphone with steady hands. His ribs still ached with every movement, the bruises deep under his skin, but he barely noticed anymore. Pain had become part of him now. He looked over the crowd again. Maybe 30 people, maybe more. Not enough to win a war, but enough to start one. He took a breath and stepped forward. "My name is Isaiah Monroe," he said, voice carrying across the square. "You know who I am, and you know why I'm here." A ripple went through the crowd, some faces hopeful, some hardened with years of disappointment. "I came to Sagebrush County because I believed this town could be better. I believed it deserved better." He let that hang in the air for a moment. But belief isn't enough. Not when the people sworn to protect you are the ones tearing you apart. The murmurs grew louder. People shifted on their feet. Some nodded. Some looked away. Isaiah raised the manila folder in one hand, holding it high. "This," he said, "is proof." He set it down carefully on the podium Hank had cobbled together from an old barrel. "Proof that your deputies, your leaders, have been stealing from you, lying to you, threatening you, hurting you. For decades, no one spoke, no one moved." Isaiah's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "And I'm not here asking for permission to fix it. I'm telling you, it ends now." Across the square, two familiar figures emerged from the crowd, moving like sharks through water. Deputy Granger, Deputy Rourke, still wearing their uniforms, like armor, still carrying themselves like men who thought they couldn't be touched. They didn't bother to hide their approach. They wanted him to see them coming. Granger's smirk was wide and ugly as he marched toward the podium. "Big talk, Monroe," he called out, voice dripping with mockery. "Real pretty speech. You think these people are gonna protect you?" Rourke flanked him, hands loose at his sides, too close to the gun at his hip. The crowd shifted uneasily, some stepping back, some drawing closer as if pulled by the tension thickening the air. Isaiah didn't flinch. He stayed where he was, planted like a stone. "I don't need protection," Isaiah said calmly. "I have the truth," Granger chuckled, the sound ugly and sharp. "Truth don't mean much around here," he said. "Out here, it's about power. And you don't have it." Isaiah stepped down from the makeshift stage, walking slowly to meet them halfway. "You're right," he said. "Alone, I don't," he turned, sweeping his gaze across the crowd. "But we do." There was a tremor in the air then, something real, something alive. Hank stepped up beside him, silent but steady. A few others moved forward too. "Mrs. Ramirez," Tyler, faces he recognized from the whispered stories and the stolen hopes. They weren't an army, but they were enough. Granger's smile faltered just a little. "You really think a bunch of farmers and shopkeepers are going to scare us?" Rourke sneered. Isaiah's voice was ice when he answered. "No," he said, "but what's coming next will." At that moment, a second truck pulled into the square, tires crunching over the gravel. Two men in dark suits climbed out, carrying briefcases and wearing badges that flashed gold in the dying light. Federal investigators. Isaiah had called them 3 days ago, sent copies of every piece of evidence he and Hank had collected. They were here now, not to watch, to act. The taller of the two agents, Cole, stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "My name is Agent Cole," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We are here under the authority of the United States Department of Justice, effective immediately. An investigation into corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice is underway in Sagebrush County." Gasps rippled through the square. Some people covered their mouths. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Granger's face drained of color. Rourke stiffened beside him, hand inching toward his gun. Isaiah saw it coming before anyone else did. He moved first. Before Rourke could draw, Isaiah closed the distance between them, knocking Rourke's hand aside and driving him back with a sharp, brutal shove. Granger reached for his weapon too, but Hank, faster than he looked, stepped in and tackled the bigger man to the ground with a grunt. Chaos exploded across the square. Shouts, screams, dust rising up in choking clouds. The federal agents moved fast, drawing their weapons and pinning both deputies to the ground, slapping cuffs onto their wrists. It was over in less than a minute. When the dust settled, Granger and Rourke lay side by side on the cracked pavement, cuffed and furious. Isaiah stood over them, breathing hard, his bruised body screaming in protest, but he stayed standing. He looked down at them, the men who had tried to bury him, who had ruled this town with fear for too long. "You lost," Isaiah said quietly. Granger glared up at him, face twisted with hatred. "This town'll never change," he spat. Isaiah shook his head slowly. "It already has." Around him, the people of Sagebrush stood taller, straighter. They weren't cheering yet, but they were watching, listening. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't looking away. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights flickered to life, casting long golden beams across the square. Isaiah turned away from the fallen deputies and faced the people. He wasn't done yet, not even close, because tearing down the rot was only the beginning. Now, it was time to rebuild something worth saving. The air in Sagebrush County felt different now, like something had cracked open and spilled into the streets, something raw, dangerous, and alive. Isaiah Monroe stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, the setting sun painting the world in blood-red light. Granger and Rourke had been dragged away, cuffed and humiliated. But the battle wasn't over, not even close, because the real enemy wasn't just two crooked deputies. It was the whole rotten machine they had built around themselves, and Isaiah was about to rip it apart, piece by piece. The crowd hadn't dispersed. If anything, it had grown. Word traveled fast in small towns. People who had hidden in their homes during the first confrontation now lined the sidewalks, murmuring in low, uneasy voices. They weren't sure what to believe yet. Isaiah knew that, and he knew exactly how to show them. Agent Cole stood nearby, conferring with his partner, both men scanning the crowd with sharp, calculating eyes. Backup had arrived, 2 more black SUVs parked down the block, their drivers watching everything through dark, tinted windows. Isaiah walked slowly to the microphone again, feeling the weight of every step. He let the murmurs settle, let the silence stretch, and then he spoke. "You've seen the arrests," he said, his voice low but steady. "You've seen the evidence, but what you haven't seen is the whole truth. The crowd leaned in, as if pulled by a string. "I didn't come to Sagebrush by accident," Isaiah continued. "I wasn't just a lucky outsider who decided to run for sheriff." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a second badge, a different one. Gold. Heavy. Federal. There was a collective gasp, sharp as a slap. "My name is Isaiah Monroe," he said, "and I've been working under federal authority since the day I set foot in this county." The crowd erupted into chaos. Shouts, questions, accusations, 1,000 emotions, all crashing together in a tidal wave. Isaiah let them roar for a moment before raising his hand, commanding silence. "You deserve better than what you got," he said, voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You deserved someone willing to fight for you, even when it wasn't easy." Especially when it wasn't easy, he swept his gaze across the faces, staring back at him, some stunned, some furious, some just struggling to catch up. "I came here to break the system that's been choking this town for decades," Isaiah said. Granger and Rourke were just the beginning. He motioned to Agent Cole, who stepped forward, holding a thick stack of documents. "Tonight," Isaiah said, "we're unsealing indictments against 23 individuals, including county officials, business owners, and law enforcement officers who participated in extortion, racketeering, and obstruction of justice." He paused, letting that number sink in. 23. It was like someone had punched the air out of the square. People stared at each other, murmuring names under their breath. Mayor Danner, Judge Lewis, Sheriff Wallace. Names that had seemed untouchable for years. Until now. Hank Myers stood near the front of the crowd, arms crossed, a grim smile tugging at his mouth. He understood the storm had come, just like Isaiah promised, and it wasn't leaving until everything rotten had been washed away. Isaiah stepped down from the podium, walking through the crowd without flinching. Some people stepped back from him, fear still in their eyes, but others, more than he expected, stepped forward. Mrs. Ramirez clutched her rosary and gave him a trembling nod. Tyler, the young father, clapped him once, hard, on the shoulder, and from the edge of the crowd, a kid barely old enough to drive lifted his chin and shouted, "We believe you, Sheriff." The dam broke after that. Applause. Real, raw, imperfect applause. Not everyone clapped, not everyone smiled. But it was a start. Isaiah reached Hank, who handed him a small black folder, something they hadn't dared reveal until this moment. Inside were the final pieces of evidence, recordings, signed statements, photographs, bank transfers, everything they needed to turn the investigation into a conviction. Isaiah held it up for all to see. "This," he said, "is the future you deserve." Behind him, Agent Cole nodded sharply, signaling his men. The SUVs roared to life, peeling away down the street toward the homes and offices of the accused. Arrests were already underway. Tonight would be a reckoning years in the making. Isaiah lowered the folder and faced the crowd again. "I didn't come here to play politics," he said. "I came here because no one else would, because justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you stand up and fight for." He let the words settle. Let the truth hammer itself into every heart and mind. "This town belongs to you," he said. Softer now, not to the men who stole from you, not to the ones who threatened you, to you. A long, powerful silence followed. Then, somewhere in the back of the crowd, a single voice called out, "Thank you," and then another, and another, until the entire square was filled with a low, rumbling chorus of gratitude and hope. Isaiah felt something shift then, something real, not just fear turning into anger, but anger turning into courage, the kind of courage that could rebuild something from the ashes. Agent Cole approached quietly, clapping Isaiah once on the back. "You did good, Monroe," he said, voice low. Isaiah didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the people, the farmers, the shopkeepers, the mothers, the kid standing a little taller now. "It's not about me," Isaiah said finally. "It never was." Cole gave a small nod and turned away, disappearing into the sea of bodies now filling the square. Isaiah stayed for a moment longer, letting the weight of it all wash over him. The pain, the loss, the cost, and the hope. Always the hope. He thought about the grave they'd tried to leave him in, the dirt pressing against his chest, the sky slipping away. He thought about Hank dragging him free, about the way a single act of courage could spark a revolution. They had tried to bury him, but they hadn't realized Isaiah Monroe was the storm. And tonight, Sagebrush County finally remembered how to stand tall in the rain. The courthouse in Sagebrush had never seen a crowd like this before. People packed into the old wooden benches until there was no room left to sit. Others lined the walls, standing shoulder to shoulder, spilling out into the hallways. The air buzzed with a restless, electric energy, fear, hope, anger, all tangled together. Isaiah Monroe stood at the front of the room, dressed in a simple dark suit. His bruises had mostly faded, but the memory of them hadn't. He carried them now like medals. Today wasn't about him. It was about making sure the people who had suffered for so long finally saw justice done in the light of day. Granger and Rourke sat at the defense table, looking smaller than they ever had before. No uniforms to hide behind now. No guns strapped to their hips. Just orange jumpsuits and the tight, pale faces of men who realized too late that power built on fear couldn't save them anymore. The judge entered, brought in from another county to ensure fairness, and the courtroom rose as one when the gavel finally banged. The trial of Sagebrush County's darkest secrets officially began. It didn't take long. Witness after witness came forward. Some were shaky, their hands trembling as they took the oath. Some spoken voices so soft, the courtroom had to lean in to hear them. But they spoke. Mrs. Ramirez, clutching a worn Bible, told how her son had been driven out of town by threats and vandalism. Tyler, the young father, described the terror of being framed, how close he came to losing everything because two men decided his life was expendable. A retired teacher with gray hair and watery eyes testified about the intimidation she faced when she refused to falsify records to protect certain officials. Each story landed like another nail, being driven into the coffin of the old sagebrush. But it wasn't just the witnesses. The evidence Isaiah and Hank had gathered painted an even darker picture. Rigged auctions, falsified police reports, missing evidence logs, wire transfers connecting the deputies to the River Rats gang that had terrorized the region for decades. There was no escape. By the time Agent Cole played the recordings, Granger's threats, Rourke's bragging, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. It wasn't just wrong. It was evil. And it had been happening under their noses for years. When it was finally Isaiah's turn to speak, he stood tall and steady before the jury, the judge, the town. "I didn't come here to tear Sagebrush apart," he said, voice carrying clear to the back of the room. "I came here because I believed it was worth saving. I believed the people of this town still had something worth fighting for." He let his eyes scan the faces in front of him. "And you proved me right." He stepped down without another word, leaving the weight of that truth hanging heavy in the room. The jury didn't need long. Guilty. On every count. As the verdicts were read, Granger slumped forward in his chair, defeated. Rourke stared straight ahead, as if refusing to believe what was happening. But the people of Sagebrush, they stood up. One by one, they rose from their seats. No shouting, no applause, just the simple, powerful act of standing, of reclaiming the dignity that had been stolen from them piece by piece over the years. Isaiah felt something tighten in his chest at the sight of it. Not pride, something better, something deeper. Later, outside the courthouse, the town gathered again, this time under the open sky. with no walls to hide behind, no shadows left for corruption to crawl into. Hank stood by Isaiah's side, his hat clutched loosely in one hand. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. Across the crowd, Isaiah caught sight of Tyler, holding his little girl in his arms, a smile breaking across his face for the first time in a long time. He saw Mrs. Ramirez weeping softly, her hands pressed over her heart. He saw people greeting each other, shaking hands, embracing, rebuilding something that had been broken but not destroyed. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings were enough. Isaiah stepped forward, raising his voice one last time. "This town," he said, "belongs to you again." He could see it now, plain as day, not just the pain, not just the history, but the future. One built on something stronger than fear, built on courage, built on truth, built on the simple, stubborn belief that some things were still worth fighting for. The people of Sagebrush County didn't cheer or shout. They just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, heads held high, as the sun sank low and painted the world in gold. And for the first time in a very long time, they weren't standing in fear, they were standing free. Morning broke soft and golden over Sagebrush County, a kind of quiet peace settling over the town that hadn't been felt in a very long time. Isaiah Monroe stood on the front steps of the sheriff's office, the badge gleaming on his chest as the first light of day washed over the streets. For the first time, he wasn't preparing for a fight. Not today. Today was about building something new. The old sign that had hung crooked over the door for years was gone now. In its place was a fresh wooden plank, carved by a local craftsman, that simply read, Sagebrush County Sheriff's Department. By the people, for the people. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't fancy, but it was honest. Inside, the office buzzed with life. Deputies moved through the halls, some new recruits, some old faces who had stood tall when it mattered most. The energy was different now, lighter, stronger. Isaiah watched them work for a while before stepping inside. Hank Myers was there too, leaning against the front desk with a mug of coffee in his hand, acting like he belonged, which, these days, he pretty much did. He tipped his hat when he saw Isaiah. "Well, Sheriff," Hank said with a grin, "looks like you went and did the impossible." Isaiah chuckled, shaking his head. "I didn't do it alone," he said. Hank nodded, his smile softening into something almost proud. "No," he said, "you just lit the fire. The rest of us finally remembered how to carry it." Isaiah walked through the office, stopping now and then to nod at a deputy, offer a few words of encouragement, answer a quick question. This place, once a nest of corruption and fear, had a long way to go before it was whole again. But it was on the way. That was enough. Later that afternoon, the town gathered again, this time in the park at the center of town, not for a protest, not for a trial, for a celebration. Families sprawled out on picnic blankets. Kids ran laughing through the grass, chasing each other under the watchful gaze of parents who didn't have to look over their shoulders anymore. Someone fired up a grill. Someone else started strumming a guitar. The scent of barbecue and fresh bread filled the air. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Isaiah found himself standing near the edge of it all, just watching, soaking it in. Hank ambled over, handing him a cold soda. "You ever think you'd see a day like this?" Hank asked. Isaiah cracked the tab open, the sharp hiss loud in the warm air. "I hoped," he said. "But hope's a funny thing. It's not enough by itself. You have to fight for it." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the town come back to life. Then Isaiah turned to Hank. "You ever think about coming back officially?" he asked. "Deputy Myers has a nice ring to it." Hank laughed, a deep, genuine sound that seemed to push back the last of the lingering shadows. "Lord, no," he said. "I'm too old, too stubborn, And I cuss too much. Isaiah smiled. Sounds like you'd fit right in. Hank clapped him on the back. I'll stick to being your unofficial advisor, he said. Less paperwork. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting everything in a warm, honeyed glow. As the people of Sagebrush ate, laughed, and lived, Isaiah felt something settle deep inside him, a peace he hadn't known he needed. He thought about everything it had taken to get here. The betrayal, the pain, the grave in the desert, the fire. It had been ugly, it had been brutal, but it had been worth it. Because standing here now, among these people, Isaiah saw it clearly. The real strength of a town wasn't in its buildings or its laws. It was in its people, in their stubbornness, in their hope, in their willingness to stand back up. No matter how many times they got knocked down, Isaiah watched as Tyler tossed his daughter up into the air, her laughter ringing out like a bell. He saw Mrs. Ramirez handing out homemade tamales from a battered cooler, her eyes shining with pride. He saw teenagers hanging banners that read, "A new day for Sagebrush." It wasn't perfect. There would still be hard days ahead. But for the first time, the town wasn't facing them alone. Isaiah finished his soda, crushed the can in his hand, and tossed it into a recycling bin someone had thoughtfully set up near the sidewalk. As he turned to head back toward the crowd, he caught Hank watching him, a knowing look on the old man's face. "What?" Isaiah asked. Hank just shook his head, smiling. "Nothing," he said, "just thinking. Sometimes it takes a man willing to be buried to teach a town how to rise again." Isaiah laughed softly, feeling the truth of it settle deep in his bones. Maybe that's what it had taken all along. Not a hero, not a savior, just someone stubborn enough not to stay buried. As the first stars began to prick the twilight sky, Isaiah Monroe stepped back into the heart of Sagebrush County, ready for whatever came next. Because this time he wasn't walking alone, and neither was the town, not ever again. The story of Isaiah Monroe reminds us that real change doesn't come easy. It takes courage to stand up when everyone else sits down. It takes strength to speak when fear demands silence, and sometimes it takes the willingness to fight not just for yourself, but for people who have lost hope long ago. We all face moments where it's easier to look away, to keep our heads down, to survive quietly. But Isaiah's journey shows us that when one person refuses to stay buried, when one person chooses to stand, an entire community can rise with them. Maybe you've lived through times when it felt like justice was out of reach. Maybe you've seen the power of fear try to silence the truth. This story is a reminder. It's never too late to fight for what's right. No matter your age, no matter your scars, your voice matters. Your courage matters. If Isaiah Monroe taught us anything, it's that hope isn't something you find, it's something you build, one act of bravery at a time. If this story moved you, if it sparked something deep inside you, we invite you to help us spread it. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that change is possible, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, courage, and second chances. Together, we can keep the spirit of hope alive. One story, one voice, one stand at a time.